speakers and moderators, there would be no America at a Crossroads. And of course, the same is true for our audience. So many thanks to all three groupings. I also want to extend a special thank you to my trusted colleague, David Lehrer. We work together on a daily basis to develop and implement each of our programs. He is a joy to work with, and I am very grateful for that partnership. And to Zev and Mel, each of whom is wholly invested in this series and who help us each week to ensure that we are covering the most compelling topics with the most qualified, outstanding speakers. So thanks to all of you. And speaking of David Lehrer, here he is to share a bit more about others of our upcoming programs. David?
Thank you, Janice. I share your gratitude for this fruitful partnership. I couldn't have hoped for a more able, hardworking, bright, and astute partner than you. I give thanks every Wednesday evening for all you do, even if I don't verbalize it. Tonight, we'll offer an inside look at what is happening in Washington from a man very close to the top, the whip of the U.S. House of Representatives, the majority whip. Next month, we will host the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who will discuss the challenges of navigating extreme partisanship as the governor of a deeply divided state. Given the militias that have surfaced there and the electoral shenanigans that voting officials were subjected to last year, she gives interesting, chilling, and instructive experiences to recount as we contemplate the upcoming elections. The following week, December 22nd, we have a new program to announce. We'll be joined by three experts on generational change, Morley Winograd, Mike Case, and Yael Bromberg. They will discuss America's youngest voters, catalysts for change, and targets of suppression. The tens of millions of millennials and the following generation, the plurals, will be critically important in elections for decades to come. We'll learn where they are headed and why. Before turning the program over to my colleague Mel Levine, I want to wish, as Janice did, all of you a happy and meaningful Thanksgiving. For all that needs repair in our nation and the world, we remained a blessed nation. Our moderator has been a friend for over 40 years. From legislative battles in Sacramento in the 70s, he's a former state assemblyman and a former congressman, a member of the JUDJ Executive Committee, and an invaluable contributor to the success of this series. Former Congressman Mel Levine. Mel?
Thank you, David. I'm just going to join you and Janice in telling our audience what a pleasure it is to work with both of you, along with our very dear friend Zev Yaroslavsky, who's 1/4 of this quadrangle. It gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker, United States House Majority Whip, James E. Clyburn, who is a proud South Carolinian and is the third-ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives. And Whip Clyburn is hardly a newcomer to his critical leadership roles. He has been in senior House leadership for the past 15 years, as he also served as whip between 2007 and 2011, and as assistant Democratic leader between 2011 and 2019. These leadership positions would come as no surprise to anyone familiar with his trajectory in the House. When he arrived as a freshman in 1993, he was immediately elected co-president of his freshman class. He subsequently served as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and as chair of the House Democratic Caucus. And his leadership reaches well beyond Congress. Representative Clyburn's endorsement of Joe Biden was the most significant single action of the 2020 Democratic primary elections. His pivotal endorsement in 2020 transformed the Democratic primary process and very quickly led to President Biden securing the nomination of his party. Whip Clyburn's leadership in that instance literally transformed the Democratic primary process virtually overnight from a chaos resembling a circular firing squad into, on the other hand, unifying the entire party behind the candidacy of Joe Biden, enabling the Democratic Party to coalesce around Joe's candidacy and eventually elect him as president. I'm keenly aware of the esteem with which Whip Clyburn is held by his colleagues. I must say that while I don't miss much about Congress these days, one of my very few regrets is that I never had the opportunity to serve with Representative Clyburn. He arrived just as I left. He is an invaluable leader, and America is fortunate that he has chosen to be a public servant at a critical time in America's history. Welcome, Whip Clyburn. We are honored that you have agreed to spend the next hour with us. But before turning to you, which Larry will do, I want to briefly introduce our wonderful moderator, Larry Mantle. Larry is one of our most frequent moderators, a delight to work with, a consummate professional, and the host of KPCC's Air Talk since 1985. Larry can discuss movies, world events, sports, and political philosophy with equal facility, and he does it every day. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including Journalist of the Year, awarded to him by his colleagues. Larry, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mel. I really appreciate those kind words, and it's just a pleasure to be part of these very special programs. I learned so much from each of the experiences moderating them. My thanks as well to Janice, to Zev, to David. It's just been a real pleasure to work with you and to have the honor to interview such remarkable guests as America at the Crossroads brings into your home every single week. And of course, this week it is the House Majority Whip, Congressman Clyburn, who joins us. Congressman, thank you so much for being a part of tonight's program. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thanks to all who have tuned in this evening. I look forward to hopefully a fruitful discussion.
I expect you'll have much of interest to say, but let's begin with what happened today in the House of Representatives. The House voting to censure Arizona Republican Paul Gosar over his posting of a Photoshop anime of him killing Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The vote today in the House also stripping him of his 2 committee assignments. And you said that you actually would have preferred an expulsion vote to be held. Share with us your thoughts about what took place.
Well, thank you. You know, my preference for that had to do with his siblings. Back in 2018, I first became aware of Mr. Gosar and his impact on some of the electorate when his sister and I believe 2 brothers, I know one, took to the airwaves to challenge his re-election and asked people not to vote for him. They said at that time, and they continue to say it today. In fact, I saw his brother just after the vote. He said, "This man is dangerous. He's my brother, but he's dangerous." And so they called for him to be expelled. And so I just associated myself with his family in that regard. But as House Majority Whip, I tend to support the consensus that's built within our caucus. And the consensus among us was to do the censure, remove him from committees, and call upon the leader of the Republican Conference to do what the family asked. As a Republican, Mr. McCarthy has a role to play in all of this. And I would think that expulsion is something he should take a hard look at.
Now, we're not privy to what took place in that GOP meeting where House members of the Republican caucus apparently met and talked this over. And apparently they were satisfied by the explanation that the congressman gave, that this was not at all to be taken literally. It was a device of art, essentially, was the argument that we heard from the congressman. So what is it about this for you that took this beyond something that was a kind of caricature into something that could pose a very real threat to members of Congress?
We're public servants, and we do business in the public. I think that if he were serious about that, he should have apologized to let's call it the recipient of his gesture, but he never did. And because so many people in the public in and outside of his family. He should have apologized to the public. He didn't do anything in public except today when he spoke. He never apologized. He still held on to his position, which I think tells us who and what he really is. So for the Republican conference to say what he said to us in private satisfied us, but what will satisfy the recipient? And Ms. Ocasio, she is not satisfied.
We are in a period where public officials are getting the kinds of threats that we have not been issued in the past. And we, of course, know that public officials have been threatened in the past. But from your perception as someone who was first elected to the House in 1993, in your years of service, has it become a more vulnerable position, perhaps more dangerous to be an elected official in America?
Yes, it has become much more dangerous. And I think that we have too many elected officials who are contributing to that atmosphere. Look, I'm from South Carolina. I know the history of South Carolina very well. I've studied all of my life, even taught some of it. And I can tell you, I remember from my studies, Preston Brooks, who caned Mr. Sumner, Senator Sumner, to near death on the floor of the House. Now, Preston Brooks was from Abbeville, South Carolina, so you can imagine. I've spent some time studying all the issues surrounding that, which had to do with the debate over slavery and whether or not we should hold on to it or get rid of it. So I know the history of this. Strom Thurmond is from South Carolina. He set the filibuster record that stands to this day over civil rights. I came to Congress in 1992. I got elected in 92, sworn in January of 93. For the last 5 years that I spent running a state agency in South Carolina, a state law enforcement officer was assigned to me for every day for those 5 years. When I left town for periods of time, a state law enforcement officer stayed in my house with my wife and children.
Hello，
So I know what it
Hello?
is to be subjected
你打给我，现在都
to
不会
these kinds
通
of
哎，
threats.
好奇怪
And
哦。
so I spoke out today because I think
Hello，can you hear
that Mr.
me？
McCarthy
You're in the meeting,
ought
right?
to
Yep.
belly up to the bar
Okay, bye bye.
and do what is
你好了
necessary
吗？
to cleanse his conference of this kind of activity. But instead, he says nothing.
我直接把整个那个 meeting 录下来了。
But look to me, 35 or 40 of his colleagues standing there with him, as if to say, we accept this censure with you, and you do not stand alone. This program is pretty aptly named. America is at the crossroads.
Congressman, let's talk about the president and your party. The president with a major victory, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which had tremendous support among Americans, according to all the polls. But on the other side, the president, the chaotic withdrawal of Afghanistan, for which tremendous displeasure by Americans, and I think for many Americans a sense of embarrassment over that process and how it was handled and how it made the country look. As you look at President Biden on net successes versus setbacks, how do you see the administration performing to this point?
Well, I think he's on the plus side of that ledger, if we set it up that way. Yeah, Afghanistan was chaotic. I think that we should have gotten out of Afghanistan a long, long time ago. Over 20 years there. I thought we never should have gone in there. If my memory serves, I don't remember every vote I took, but I know how I feel about it. And so I think I was opposed to us going to, Iraq. I understood. It posed a threat though we didn't have